Talk Shop.
The Talk Shop on SAfm 104 to 107. I am Masechaba Mtolo, talking about the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation's Building an Inclusive Society program. We get an update on how the program has been running and how they're getting communities to understand that reconciliation and social development is inherently linked. To tell us more is the head of the Building an Inclusive Society program, Mr. Stanley Henkeman. Good evening to you, sir, and thank you so much for your time. Welcome onto the Talk Shop.
Good evening, Masechaba. Wonderful to be on the show, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, sir. We've spoken about the Building an Inclusive Society program before, but just for the benefit of our listeners, a recap. What informed this program?
Masechaba, we are one of the programs in the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and the Institute started in the year 2000 in the aftermath of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it was felt by the people who started it that, there was a lot of unfinished business that emanated from the TRC, and particularly the business of reconciling with each other as people who live in the same country. And the program was initially called Reconstruction and Reconciliation. Over the last about 2 years ago, we felt that in the light of the type of work that we do, it would probably be more appropriate to call it Building an Inclusive Society, because that's in essence our vision, to work towards a kind of society where we think inclusively, where we act inclusively, and where is done in terms of looking out for everybody else and not just myself and my group of people.
I want to talk about this link. Are taking your calls. Join our conversation as we talk about the Building an Inclusive Society program right here on SAfm. 0891 104 207 is the number to dial to join our conversation, or SMS 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2.
The news around your world changes by the minute.
Semi-skilled workers from neighboring countries will be able to seek it.
Says all people who are tasked with
simply to say, we are sorry.
Dozens of foreigners have started leaving the area.
For a loyal listener like you, losing out on the latest news is not an option. To stay in touch with updated news and views, simply tune in and keep up. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
You have what it takes to run your own business. You see opportunities where others have given up. y.co.za to enter. Entries close 16 June. Sanlam Business Partners Entrepreneur of the Year competition. Celebrating entrepreneurial excellence.
The National Arts Festival in Grahamstown runs from the 27th of June to the 7th of July. The biggest festival on the continent has 3,000 performances, including the best theatre, hottest jazz, awesome dance, great music, lectures, comedy, film, performance art, exhibitions and much more. It's the place to be this winter. Book now at CompuTicket. Visit us online at www.nationalartsfestival.co.za. The National Arts Festival, 11 days of amazing, in partnership with SAfm, South Africa's news and information leader.
The Warrenton community and surrounding areas will join the Minister of Energy, Ms. Dipuo Peters, and the Premier of the Northern Cape, Ms. Sylvia Lucas, in celebrating the government electrification program and connections to houses since 1994 in both urban and rural areas. The country is now 85% electrified, and a new household electrification strategy has been initiated to address the outstanding 15% through grid and non-grid means. In Warrenton, on the 6th of June, the Minister will switch on electricity in the 5.6 millionth house.
The Talk Shop.
This is the Talk Shop on SAfm 104 to 107. I am Masechaba Mtolo in conversation with Mr. Stanley Henkeman, head of the Building an Inclusive Society program under the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. And we are taking calls 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701. SMS number is 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. We're talking about reconciliation and social development. Mr. Henkeman, let's talk about this link, reconciliation and social development. Does that mean we can't reconcile if there's been no social development taking place?
Not at all, not at all. All we're saying is that you cannot have the one exclusively at the, and neglect the other. If you just focus on reconciliation, without taking into account that as a country, the people in this country don't start from a clean slate. The playing fields are not level, as it were. And so if you just focus on reconciliation and say, let's kiss and make up, in the end it will become cheap because if the lives of people are not, especially people who have been disadvantaged as a result of the past, if their lives are not improved, then reconciliation means very little. On the other hand, if you only focus on social development and you only focus on bettering people's without understanding, who come from very, very different backgrounds and have very different experiences of our history, and if you don't get these people to come together and find each other, it's not good enough. So you need a combination of the two, and you can't do the one while neglecting the other.
One of the challenges that we face is that how we define reconciliation, how we define social development is not exactly the same for everybody. Some people see social development as handouts, just giving out handouts and allowing people to develop a culture of entitlement, of sitting back and waiting for them to be given stuff. And then you also have those who believe that reconciliation cannot happen in South Africa simply because we've never been in a situation where we were reconciled to each other. So how do we reconcile when we were never on the same page before? How do we get everybody on the same page with regards to what the vision is and what the goal is?
Masechaba, you're touching on a very, very important thing, because the notion of reconciliation is a very, very difficult thing to define, and it does mean different things to different people. Similarly, social development also defies kind of a single interpretation. But what we say at the Institute is that all these challenges that we have in this country can be absolutely insurmountable if you look at them in their totality. Our approach is very simple. Let's work with individuals. Let's work at the individual level, because the mistake we sometimes make is that we think that change must be imposed from the top, and very often people expect government to introduce all these changes, and then hopefully the culture in our society will change, and then hopefully people will get on better, and people's lives will be improved. Next year we'll be 20 years into this democracy, and we've seen very little of it. I'm not for 1 minute saying that government doesn't have a role to play. Government has an important role to play. What we are saying is let's turn that thing on its head, and let's start with individuals, and let's challenge individuals to find their voice, to assert their history, to understand who they are, and to understand the role that they can play in society. And once you start at that level, your interaction with somebody else will be different, because you will interact with that person from a position of being empowered yourself, of knowing who you are. And when individuals started acting differently and speaking differently to each other, you begin to change the culture. And so for us, that's an important starting point. The other starting point for us is that you cannot, and it comes back to this link between reconciliation and social justice. You know, you cannot just speak about political change and social change and neglect the important aspect of economic change. And so we have a project, you know, in the Institute called Inclusive Economies. And so part of building an inclusive society is to also look at ways in which you can advance the notion of building inclusive economies. And it is really about creating opportunities for the everyday person in the street. And while Black economic empowerment has its role, and it has helped a lot of people, the fact of the matter is it still does not help us in our quest to build an inclusive economy. There are just still too many people outside of the economy. And as long as that happens, it makes this notion of reconciliation very, very tenuous. And so it's really so inclusiveness for us, inclusivity for us, is not just about people being happy with each other, because the last thing we want to do is to help create happy oppressed people.
Absolutely. So how is the Building an Inclusive Society program ensuring, or at least taking these messages to the communities? What projects are you using to try and get these conversations going?
We have, in our Building an Inclusive Society program, we have a number of projects, and let me just name a few. The one is a project called Memory, Arts and Culture. And we use the arts and particularly indigenous music as a tool to advance reconciliation. Let me give a practical example. At the moment, our project leader is busy with a project in Vryheid in KwaZulu-Natal. Now you're talking about a rural area, and so essentially what she does is she works with young people between the ages of 14 and up to 30, and she gets older people from the community to explain to them, what the indigenous instruments are all about, show them how to make it, and then how to play it. And what has happened so besides the actual skill of making these instruments and playing them, they also get to get the opportunity or the skill to explain to other people this process. And so what you do in the process, you're actually helping people, young people, who normally would not be able to express themselves in a way, where they are confident, to get that confidence. So we have a number of young people now in Vryheid who are making drums, who are making musical instruments and playing them, but more than that, also selling them to make some money. We have an example, in fact, at our report back last week, one of the young ladies from Kriel said that as a result of the confidence she gained at these workshops, she got employment. Granted, it's at the moment temporary, but there's every opportunity for her to now get into the job market. And so there are stories like that where young people's confidence is raised. We had a group from the Northern Cape in Kalfinia, and they do traditional dancing, Khoisan dancing, and we have given them a platform to show what they're able to do. And the audience there was a mixed audience, and people inquired about the work that they do, and so there's every opportunity for them to now dance somewhere else for money. And then we have a youth leadership development program where we help young people who are out of school, unemployed in our townships, and we link them with university students, same age as they are, who are at university. So these two groups of people who normally don't have much to talk about are now in conversation about issues facing young people. And then there's a third aspect that is brought into that equation, and that is industry. Because both unemployed young people and university young people have the same need for employment. And so the third leg of that dialogue is with industry. And so again, the possibility of getting young people into the job market is created in that project. And then we have schools oral history project where we work with school kids and with school teachers, and it is really around teaching them the basic skills of doing oral history, and so a number of these young people now take part in a national competition run by the Department of Basic Education. It's called the Albert Lutuli Oral History Competition, and because of the skills that they gain through our project, they confidently participate in this competition, which goes right up to national level.
But what about programs or projects for adults? I mean, I'm looking at the various projects that you've been explaining, and they're all aimed at young people. And we do know that young people are influenced by their elders, by their parents. We can talk about social, reconciliation. We can talk about social development. But if the elders are not buying into it, how do we expect our young people to maintain that kind of social cohesion?
Masechaba, that's a very fair question. And so we have a project called Community Healing Project, where we work with older people in the community, and particularly people who play leadership roles. And since 2004, we have trained over 200 people from communities in the art of facilitating dialogue within communities, and particularly the skill to identify fault lines and to facilitate roundtables and discussions within the communities with various stakeholders in order to deal with the issues in the communities in a proactive way, but also in a way that doesn't take offense or give offense. And we have examples, for instance, of areas where communities are now taking full control of what's happening, and I can give you an example of a coastal town on the west coast of the Cape called Doringbaai, a fishing village, and normally you find that these villages have all kinds of social problems. But what we have there is a group of people who have constructed a community dialogue platform, and they use the community policing forum as the container for that dialogue. And it is absolutely amazing what happens when we visited them and sat in the meetings. The police, the local police chief would, for instance, give a report on the crime statistics for the area, and then identify problems that can be solved by the community. And it's amazing how people in the community sitting around the table then rally around to see how they can deal with that. There was an example of the correctional services representative saying that 2 people were going to be released back into the community. And what was absolutely amazing was that the discussion then revolved around, so how do we help them to reintegrate so that they don't feel that they need to go back to the same kinds of things that took them to prison. And it was just, for me, it was a glimpse of what is possible in a society where people pull together. And when I in that forum, you have everybody represented in the community, from the Ratepayers Association to the Fishermen's Association, and so for us, we see the value in also helping community leaders to take charge of the communities. And the interesting thing about something like that is that the local municipality becomes a stakeholder in that dialogue. And so the issues of the community are discussed in that dialogue, and as a stakeholder, the municipality, is also around the table to try and find solutions. And so you find that the violent protests, is minimized in a setting like that, because there's a sense that people are buying into their own future. And then we also work with teachers, because there's an area where we believe, we need to play a bigger role. And so we have a project called Education for Reconciliation.
Yes, yeah. If you want to read up more about the projects, the different projects that the Building an Inclusive Society program are involved with, visit their website. It's ijr.org.za, ijr.org.za. And then you can just click on the Building an Inclusive Society link, and you'll get access to all their projects and their program contacts, as well as what Building an Inclusive Society program is all about. We really, really hope that we can go beyond the cheap or easy reconciliation or reconstruction. As the Building an Inclusive Society program says, this is not an option. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Mr. Stanley Henkeman.
Absolute pleasure, Masechaba, and thank you for having me.
Mr. Stanley Henkeman is the head of the Building an Inclusive Society program, talking about their different projects, and also just talking about how the program is grounded in the belief that reconciliation necessarily entails reconstruction and transformation, and vice versa. Right now, though, we're moving on, and we're talking